Suena ahí la orquesta.
Welcome in, and guess who? It's Brady Michael, and I'm back, and we'll be hogging the mic once again. Recording from what was supposed to be a stormy Jonesboro, Arkansas, is just really sad and dreary. Today is going to be a shorter episode, at least I want to say that, as the family and I have a Texas-style wedding to attend this weekend. And of course, not to get personal, but I could use that thing called sleep, I think. It's interchangeable with caffeine at this point since this week has been chaotic. Anywho, today's episode will lean heavily football, but we gotta start with hoops. The heartbreaker in T-Town followed up by, you could pull a Mad Lib and say, awful verb, and put that in front of what happened in Tennessee. And obviously, Kentucky and John Calipari, we get the second chance at them. They're back and coming to Fayetteville this weekend. We'll hope that I can keep my eyes off the NFL Combine, which just started. I believe the linebackers and defensive line get to go today. So Drew Sanders, he's in there somewhere. Last week we looked at 3 SEC East football players I believe can break out in 2023. The West is up today. And a small preview of what Wright State has to offer the Razorbacks this weekend, and a little bit of a delve into the Eastern Illinois series and Illinois State, the midweek game. And you can't say it's a surprise anymore, but the Arkansas men and women's indoor track and field both won SEC titles. And if there's time, spring football is upon us, and I'll take a look at some of the best available transfers on the market. Before I get to any of that, I kept my promise, so you can hold the tomatoes, save them. Hawgin the Mic is now available on YouTube, and if you're listening on there, thank you. You have proof. Just search the name of the pod, Hawgin the Mic, on YouTube, and I'll likely put it in the description if you find it on Spotify or anywhere else. It's also available in the usual suspects of, as I mentioned, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcast, and iHeartRadio as well. You can find me personally on Twitter at bmichael. Michael spelled Michael, replace the I with a 1. And on Instagram at Brady_Michael with Michael the exact same way. So I didn't really find any interesting story to come up with or just dive into. But I will say, the XFL coming back, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, his football league, it has been entertaining nonetheless. And there's been a little bit of a story that has kind of emerged with A.J. McCarron, who has taken less money, obviously, going from a third-string quarterback on an NFL team down to the XFL, because he has 2 sons that he has just wanted to see them experience their dad playing football. And that has been the biggest story over the last 2 weeks since he's gone public with that. Currently, A.J. McCarron, he's 2-0 with the St. Louis Battlehawks. I almost said Blues, wrong sport. And that has been a great inspiration and story for Dwayne Johnson to get into the XFL a little bit. Obviously, rules are different. I don't want to dive into all of them, but the kickoff being 5 yards, you have each team 5 yards apart, so just action on the kickoff. That's a great rule. You no longer kick extra points. You go for 1, 2, or 3 points after you score a touchdown. The reviews, they give access into the booth to see how or why calls are being made the way that they are. Instant interviews on sideline after plays with players, coaches that are just heated at a bad call. It's a really interactive broadcast that they're going about when you have the NFL that just likes to stick suit and tie. Currently, just to talk about the standings a little bit, the DC Defenders and, as mentioned, St. Louis Battlehawks are both 2-0 in the North Division, and then you have Seattle and Las Vegas both 0-2. And then the given champs of the first time that the XFL came back around was the Houston Roughnecks in 2020. Not officially, but they finished undefeated. They still haven't lost a game in the XFL. They're also 2-0. And then you have Arlington. They are 1-1, along with the San Antonio Brahmas, which is one of the new teams and has a logo that I'm still trying to decide if I like or not. And then the Orlando Guardians is one that I don't like, and they're 0-2. But anyway, on with what we're actually here for. And it's really not something that I want to talk about. The good news is, okay, well, it's not great no matter where you look, but going 0-2 versus Alabama and Tennessee in basketball, obviously, didn't screw up the metrics, so blow the confetti cannons. So the tourney is still on unless the fans make a waiver to have signed as a form of submission to just stay home. Even so, Arkansas remains the 8th seed for the SEC tournament, and I believe the 8th seed is the floor as it stands. While the Tennessee game has almost nothing for me to discuss with a smile, the Alabama loss by 3 kind of does. It's been noted, but Arkansas had this game won, but the final was 86-83 Alabama. Bama scored 58 points in the second half. No need to say anything about that. That wasn't the flatline point, though. It wasn't the minus 11 rebound margin Arkansas had. Free throws, 69%. Arkansas shot to Alabama's 83.3. Mark Sears and Brandon Miller, who shouldn't have been playing. No need to dive back into that bag. But their combination to shoot 16-17 from the free throw line was killer. There's no single player to point at Arkansas that, had one bad performance. It was all, I think Ricky Council went 10 of 14 at the line, and then a few other players just missed one or two dink and dunks here and there. Going into the game, I said that Arkansas needed a big play, a big performance from one of the bigs. And ultimately, that did not happen. Graham had 2 points with 3 blocks. 3 blocks were huge, but nothing else really came out of him. Mikal had 5 points and 8 rebounds. And Makai, well, there's no need to talk about that. Devo did all that he could, but someone of Brandon Miller's size needs more dominant presences, make it plural, in the paint. And while Arkansas really couldn't provide it. Nick Smith did, however, get the SEC Freshman of the Week, not Coe. Pretty used to seeing Coe next to a lot of SEC awards that our guys get, but he was the complete Freshman of the Week following the game, which is a net positive. He had 24 points on 9 of 23 shooting, a little bit of a cringe there. Not great, but he's the one I'm okay with pulling 23 shots. He also had 6 rebounds in 40 minutes, played the entire game. Do I have to talk about Tennessee? I really don't. But it's like getting a shot with a big needle. It's got to happen, so let's just do it. The Hogs lose on Rocky Top, 75-57, and no Devo slander. I mean, none at all here. But when he leads the team in scoring, rebounding, and assists, that is a huge red flag. And if you listen to the Late Kick with Josh Pate, I believe I mentioned him last week, he likes to call certain things that signify just bad as padlock stats, which means that you could look at a certain stat and be like, yeah, they definitely won or lost that game. Well, your leading scorer being Devo with 13 and then leading every other category of rebounds and assists, that's a padlock stat that you could show me, and I would believe that we lost. On top of that, though, getting into a little bit more of the stats, Arkansas shot 36.7% from the field, which was from 18 made shots, only 18, opposed to Tennessee shooting a perfect half, 50%. Free throws were pitiful once again, and that's just been the story of SEC play. Arkansas shot 59.1%, which was 13 of 22. And the only other stat that sells out Arkansas is the minus 10 assist deficit to Tennessee. It was an 8-18 assist difference. 4 players were in double figures, which were the usual suspects outside of Devo Davis, Anthony Black, Nick Smith Jr., and Ricky Council. The rest of the players totaled 8 points, and that's gross. The thing is, Zakai Ziegler went down with the ACL tear. Godspeed to him, and he's out for the rest of the year. And that was really early in the game. And Tennessee just could not be stopped offensively. I'm just ready for Santiago Vescovi to graduate. And that's all. Kentucky, I thought would be a little bit more hot coming into this game before the Vanderbilt loss, which I did not see coming. No one really saw that coming, despite how much of a better season Jerry Stackhouse's company has had. They were on a 4-game winning streak, and now they get to come into Fayetteville and Arkansas. It's a whiteout. There's not much more to say. But Arkansas really needs the momentum going into the SEC tournament. Because if you lose, you get stuck at that 8 seed. And then assuming that you make it out of the first round, which there's no safe assumptions anymore, I think I've learned that lesson, then you get Alabama, who did almost lose to Auburn. But again, that's not a team that I'd want to play twice within a 2-week period. Baseball gets Wright State this weekend. Have to move away from the sadness that is the basketball results this past week. But they get Wright State after a 2-1 split with Eastern Illinois. The first 2 games were dominant wins over EIU, which was followed up by a 12-3 beating that really caught everyone off guard. And there's a lot of good and also a hefty amount of bad. Hagen Smith is now the standalone pitcher after that series with an ERA still sitting at 0. The usual bats thus far in 2023 were active, but one guy is starting to gain steam a little bit, and that's Peyton Holt out of nowhere. The junior college transfer and Greenwood, Arkansas native, racked up in one game, snagging 2 hits with 2 RBIs in 4 at-bats, but didn't get a chance in the other 2 games, being games 2 and 3, which was mildly concerning and or confusing. Caleb Calley got himself 1 plate appearance during the series in Game 1 and was walked, didn't record a hit. That changed, but we'll get to that. Certainly better than what Arlington saw, which was 7 strikeouts. Anyway, he got 2 plate appearances in Game 2, and while not getting a hit after that weekend, he did grab another walk and did rack up a run as he got home. Parker Rowland got involved at catcher and picked up 2 hits in replacement for Hudson Polk. Jared Wagner, just learned that you actually don't say his name Wagner, it's pronounced Wagner. But Jared Wagner was once again excellent. He had 3 runs in as many at-bats, and Jace Borfin kept his unexpected hot bat going as he picked up 3 hits in 4 at-bats. Doing so actually boosted his average above Wagner and remained there throughout the weekend. While neither Brady Tigert and Cody Frank had an awful performance over the weekend, they did give up their first runs of the season, and that should have been a sign for bad things to come in Sunday's game. Arkansas ran into the Panthers' best pitcher, which was Kai Hampton, and he went 7 innings and only gave up 3 hits and 3 runs as well, while Arkansas's bullpen solidified some of our fears that were kind of manifesting. After Hunter Holland polished off an all-right outing, which led to Cody Adcock, Zach Morris, Gage Wood, and Parker Coyle giving up a combined 8 runs, EIU's 2 best bats got active to complete the cherry on top in what ended up being that 12-3 loss. Now, Illinois State, before I get to that, there was news right after the game via DVH that Ben McLaughlin is supposed to have knee surgery, and they expect it to be minor. And if it is minor, he'll be out 3 weeks. And if it's not as minor, they said the max will be 6 weeks. So midweek games should come with a heart monitor from now on. Illinois State nearly catching the Hogs in extras after handling Arkansas State in a weekend series. It came with a negative, though. We were talking about injuries. Brady Tigert exited with an unknown and undisclosed injury. DVH didn't seem to know much after the game, but was avid about the need to have other pitchers step up. And the bad performances that were exhibited in this game was part of that reason why. Zach Morris is just not having a great year. A lot of people were hoping he could be the next Kevin Kopps, which they will never be, so don't make that comparison. But Zach Morris was not one of those pitchers that stepped up. His rough outing ended up being just a single inning pitched as the starter, giving up 5 hits and 2 earned runs. Cody Adcock did come in and avenged his lackluster start. He pitched 2 innings and only gave up a hit. And Dylan Carter recorded the same, but he did not give up a walk. Certainly a need of a step-up guy at the pitcher position. The only problem is there's so much youth. So who is that guy? We need to figure it out very soon with Tigert's health and situation currently up in the air. All we can do is pray about that. Stovall, Wagner, and Diggs, who had the game winner, of course, had 3 hits each. And then, of course, you want to talk about the back-to-back jacks. The first one done by Stovall, I believe, and then Kendall Diggs got the one. And then, remember, I said Caleb Calley's no longer hitless. Well, he got himself a home run and his first official hit as an Arkansas Razorback. So he's got the goose egg out of his stat sheet, and it'll be certainly a hit to remember. And there was a lot of talk about, has Arkansas ever had a game where there were 3 straight homers and no one could really come to an immediate answer? So maybe a little bit of history there. I guess we'll find out whenever we do a little bit more research. So they ended up surviving in extra innings, and you just got to move on. Wright State awaits them this weekend. And can the Hogs finally just handle business? Don't play with your food. This is a team that you should be able to eat up. News is that there's potential for a doubleheader due to weather, so we'll see if that gets announced. But Wright State is coming into Fayetteville with a 2-5 record with 1 win over Hawaii, who I didn't know played baseball anyway, and Kentucky. They have been outscored in both series when you combine the runs, 36-68. Looking at their pitching, it has been putrid. Outside of their Saturday guy, Sebastian Gongora, who has 2 starts, both with 5 innings, and he currently holds a 1.8 ERA and has given up 5 hits and 5 runs, 4 walks, and only 4 strikeouts. Jake Shirk is one of their other starters, and he's a high-risk, high-reward guy, with hits and strikeouts being his 2 highest categories. He had a great game to open the year, but Kentucky took him to the woodshed, and he didn't last very long in that game. The day 3 starter is up in the air, but the odds are is that it's going to be disappointing for them. One of their main starters to begin the year currently holds a 43.8 something ERA, and he has 2 starts. So there's a good chance that they're looking for somebody else to start on day 3. As far as their bats go, Andrew Patrick is their rake. He's a big sophomore hitting .471, and he's slugging .941. He has 8 hits in 17 at-bats. Not a ton of at-bats to this point, with 2 home runs. Jay Lukart is noteworthy. He had a 4-for-4 game versus Kentucky, which was their win in that series, actually, and he's hitting .292 this year with 6 runs on 7 hits. He's also pitched 4 innings, so Wright State pulling the Shohei Ohtani downgrade out, and we'll see if he ends up pitching and hitting in one of the games this weekend. That win at Kentucky that they had, they racked up 13 hits, and the other 2 games in that Kentucky series that they lost both had 4 hits. So just keep their bats quiet and hope that Arkansas can get a sweep, and it is one that 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, I might even say that Arkansas should sweep Wright State. Well, let's go ahead and get into the TwitterCon. I honestly don't think it's a safe place as we sit here. So many had Final Four tattooed on their chests and other things that I can't say on this show. Got to keep it family friendly. That was after last week. So now where do we stand? Some are eating ice cream out of the pint, while others have gone rogue, and that's nothing new, however. Agitation is sky high, and John Calipari may need a few extra bodyguards this weekend. Fayetteville may be a war zone, and that goes for Twitter as well. Baseball playing the risky games, as we all know. We need football news now. Freshman and transfer numbers were great and all that they were released. We get to know who was what number, but that's barely anything. Other things that, should get a little bit of attention, obviously, Jalen Carter, the projected number 1 overall pick from Georgia, got a warrant for his arrest for reckless driving. And I don't want to say it's funny because it's not. But the thing is, about a month ago, it was said that he has personality issues that NFL GMs should look into. And everyone just shrugged it off. And then all of a sudden, it disappeared. And now you have this. So who knows? Going back to Arkansas stuff, there's not a lot to it. No extracurricular stunts got huge notice, which, to be fair, I've been rather inactive this week, trying not to drown in work. It comes down to Kentucky. Lose, and a meltdown may turn into the X, keying the car and doing the rest of the Carrie Underwood song. The TwitterCon rating this week, it's not going to be a good one. Matter of fact, I think it might be worse than last week. And that's why I'm giving it an 8.5 out of 10. It is not a safe place to be. Don't let your kids get access to your Twitter account. Not that I think you would anyway. It's a sacred thing. All right, so I mentioned track and field at the beginning. Now, I'm not a guru when it comes to anything track and field related. Matter of fact, I had my roommate in here with me, helping me look at some of the stats. It was a 5-page PDF on results and whatnot after the SEC titles had closed. And I mean, just look at me. Well, just picture it at least. I always want to bring up the big Arkansas news, and this certainly qualifies as both the men and women's team took home the SEC championship once again, which is the 4th straight for the men and 9th straight, nearly a decade, for the women. That's just an insane streak. Looking at points, because that's really about all I understand outside of times, and, Arkansas finished in first for the men, racking up 100.25 points. Second was Florida, who picked up 73, and Alabama had 63 in third. It was a big, consistent effort overall, no just overly dominant performances. And then you look at the women, and that narrative kind of switches. They put up 130.5 points, and the second closest was Florida as well, and they had 84. And then you had another big drop-off in third, which was Tennessee with 56.33. The ladies swept the floor, needless to say. Aiden Owens was a guy that pretty well etched his name as the most dominant guy in the SEC championship. He placed first in the 60-meter. He placed first in the long jump. Shot put, he placed third. High jump, he placed fourth. 60-meter hurdles, he placed first. Fourth in pole vault, and he was also first in the 1,000-meter. And that's just impressive. And then Lauren Gregory won the Cliff Harper Trophy, which is essentially the MVP of the weekend for the women. And she was first in the women's mile and first in the 3,000-meter. So let's claim some more national titles, shall we? Add on to those banners that we get to hang up in Barnhill and beyond. All right, time to get into the good stuff. Football. And that football content brings me great joy, and it's something that I think every Arkansas fan needs, even if we're discussing teams that we're supposed to loathe. Obviously, we're looking at SEC West potential breakout players via my opinion, so you can disregard this all you want. I don't care. And we're going to look at 3 players for most teams. Some teams I get a little bit into 4. But we're going to start with Auburn. Obviously, the new era with Hugh Freeze taking over and taking a ton. I say a ton. It wasn't a ton, but a good chunk of in-conference transfers makes up his transfer portal haul thus far. And they haven't reached out to get a transfer portal quarterback, which is interesting. Calzada leaving is awful for them. I believe he went to Incarnate Word. Anyway, Freeze has some weapons at his disposal, and maybe the reason he's not going after a transfer quarterback is because I believe Robbie Ashford can be a breakout player for him. He'll be a junior next year, obviously the former Oregon Duck. He was second on the team in rushing last season, but we'll disregard that. Why him? That's what you're probably asking. Why Robbie Ashford after we saw what he did? Well, he's got what Freeze likes in a quarterback. As long as they can tweak his accuracy and fix up some of his decision-making, he could be an interesting guy to watch. Last year, 1,613 pass yards, 49% completion clip, had a 1-to-1 touchdown-interception ratio, 7 tutties and interceptions. And being second on the team in rushing yards, that was 710, and he also ran it for 7 touchdowns. Speaking of transfers, another guy that I think can break out is Brian Batty, who is a running back about the size of a jelly bean from USF, and he will be a junior. South Florida transfer, as I mentioned. He is 5'7", maybe 170 pounds soaking wet. He's built like a Lego brick and weighs about as much. But he is super quick, speedy, whatever you want to say. He's a problem when the ball gets in his hands. You just got to get a hold of him. Last year as a Bull, he had 1,186 rushing yards on 176 carries, which comes out to 6.7 yards per carry. He had 8 touchdowns, and as I mentioned, he's a jukebox as well. Is he ready for the SEC? That's the thing. NFL GMs will look at running backs, and of course now it's like the top 10 leading rushers in the NFL are always at least 200 pounds, no matter if they're 5'8" or 6'1". Batty is 170 pounds. I would expect they're adding weight as quickly and as much as they can, but I think he could be an issue. Number 3, Wesley Stainer, linebacker, and he'll be a senior. It's Stainer. Wesley Steiner. Excuse me, I can't read what I've typed. Owen Papo and Derek Hall are out, and they need an experienced linebacker to fill the gaps, and it's some big gaps that are going to be left by the two. Last year, Steiner had 46 tackles, and he had 10 tackles against Ole Miss. And Riley, the other linebacker that's coming back, needs a running mate. A guy to watch is the huge defensive tackle from Oregon. He got some action at Auburn last year, but Jason Jones, 6'6", 330. He got some experience in the SEC, got his feet wet, and he's likely the starter at nose tackle, at just regular D tackle. I wouldn't want to see him coming off the edge. I know that much. He's pretty fast for how big he is. We'll move on to Mississippi State. Unprecedented, obviously, but Zach Arnett gets his shot at head coach as a hardcore defensive guy. And in return, Kevin Barbe comes in as their offensive coordinator, who coached App State's stellar offense. They lost 3 quarterbacks to the transfer portal, but their most important one is staying in Starkville. And, of course, that's Will Rogers. Looking at their 3 players, starting with running back Jaquavius Marks, who will be a senior next year. Feels like he's been there longer than that. Say, how a running back? It's Mississippi State. Well, as I said, unprecedented. Rest in peace to Mike Leach, but Barbe comes in, and he used 3 running backs last year at App State. And you had guys like Cameron Peoples, Nate Noel, and I can't think of the other one off the top of my head. But he produced some really solid running backs as a coach for the Mountaineers. Last year, Marks had 532 rushing yards on 102 carries, picked up 9 touchdowns, and had 274 receiving yards on 45 catches. And he will be RB1 as Dylan Johnson, their backup, transferred out. So it is Jaquavius's show to run. And the fact that at App State, Barbe split carries with 3 running backs, it'll be likely that he's going to be a workhorse, and we're going to probably see him crack 1,000 yards, assuming their offensive line is worth something. Next guy, Justin Robinson, junior wide receiver. Austin Williams, he's gone. Ra Thomas, gone. Caleb Ducking, he's in the transfer portal. He could come back, but gone. And Williams is the guy that they need to just step into that role. He had kind of a breakout year last year when you consider he basically didn't do anything before 2022. He had 30 catches for 326 yards on 3 touchdowns. The bowl game against Illinois was his breakout game, if you want to call it that. And he is a guy that makes catches through contact frequently. And that comes from, of course, how big he is, 6'4", 220 pounds. I wouldn't want to be a corner lining up against him, especially in the red zone. That's where they get him the ball the most. Isaac Smith is the first freshman I'm actually going to mention, and he is a safety. And I've said it before that playing freshman DBs in the SEC is an awful idea, but sometimes it works out. He also plays some wide receiver too, so honestly he could play on either side of the ball. I don't really know what they're going to do with him, but currently he's listed as a safety. Defense is going to be hard to judge, and they need portal help when the portal opens back up because they lost lots of talent. Isaac Smith, his senior year of high school, he picked up 76 tackles, 4 TFLs, and 10 interceptions. He's really speedy, and he'll be ready to play. Again, he'll have to work his way in, get some game experiences against the non-conference teams, and I think he can maybe step into a starting role maybe next year, but we'll see how good he is. But if there's a position for Mississippi State that's going to need a little bit of help, it's going to be defensive back, mainly safety. Like Emmanuel Forbes will be gone. So that's that. Ole Miss now, Kiffin killed the first portal cycle once again and created a 3-way quarterback battle with Jackson Dart, who's now joined by Spencer Sanders and Walker Howard. And they get Quishon Judkins back. The question will be, can the offensive line and defensive line improve? Time will tell. First guy on their list for me is a wide receiver, but it's probably not the one that you're thinking of. They got the Texas A&M transfer, Chris Marshall. I like Trey Harris. He'll be a junior wide receiver next year, coming in from Louisiana Tech. Obviously, saying that they lose wide receivers. They lost Malik Heath and Mingo. They're out. But don't sleep on Harris. Last year, he had 65 catches, 935 yards, and 10 touchdowns. He had 3 100-yard 100-yard games. And he has an ideal frame, 6'3", 200 pounds. They're probably going to try and make him a little bit bigger, present him as a red zone threat when you have Chris Marshall as your outside guy that's, he's a problem in more ways than one, but we'll see if he'll be a problem on the field for Ole Miss. J.J. Pegues, the defensive tackle, is my next guy. He'll be a senior, transferred into Ole Miss last year, and he had a solid first year. The D-line was not hit by the portal super hard, so odds are is that he's going to get to step into that starting DT role full-time. Last year, had 26 tackles with 5 TFLs, 3 sacks, and is the second biggest plug up the middle behind Xavier Harris, who was a true freshman last year. He's a heaping 6'7", like 340, could probably wrestle an elephant. Anywho, already up to a second true freshman here. I only mentioned one in my East breakdown, but Suntarine Perkins, how can you not bring him up? He's Ole Miss's lone 5-star from the state of Mississippi, and he'll be a problem at linebacker. He was the top linebacker, according to the 247 Sports Composite, but has a lot to compete with, like another transfer, Monty Montgomery from Louisville. People are calling Perkins to be like Harold Perkins, oddly enough, the freshman for LSU that started dominating as the season went on. Arkansas, we know plenty well what he did in that game. But as a senior in high school, Suntarine had over 2,000 yards rushing as well as playing linebacker. But he racked up 92 tackles with 4 interceptions, recovered 4 fumbles. And no matter how you look at it, he's going to be a future star. It's just whether it's immediate game 1 or if it's at the end of the season or next year, assuming he stays injury-free. Moving to Texas A&M, the big story is Jimbo. Will he give full power to Bobby Petrino with a guy like Connor Wegman not to be wasted? Tons out, but not a lot in when it comes to the transfer portal. History says that they will bounce back, and I say that very hesitantly. First guy on the list, I mentioned him already actually. Connor Wegman. You give full power to Bobby Petrino, and a quarterback like him is going to be hard to see not become at least a very solid player for them when you had horrible quarterback play. A little improvement goes a long way. He'll be a sophomore next year, and it's really his job to lose this summer when you look at it. Obviously, the former 5-star prized and best quarterback recruit that Jimbo's ever seen, he has the tool set. We'll just see if he can gain the experience. He did gain experience, but we'll see if they can continue to improve. Last year, he had 896 passing yards on a 55.3% completion clip, 8 touchdowns, and most importantly, no interceptions were thrown. He also had 97 rush yards. And moving on, another true freshman, but when you lose the guy that you do, Devon Achane, you bring in Reuben Owens, who's a running back, obviously. L.J. Johnson is another running back that transferred out of A&M. So who else is there really? Well, Reuben Owens comes in as a top 3 running back recruit. Quick acceleration, and he's also a really dynamic receiving back. His senior year of high school, he had 1,781 yards on 8.4 yards per carry. That's from 213 carries, so already a workhorse coming in. And he also had 25 touchdowns. Shifting to defense for them, McKinley Jackson, it's another guy that feels like he's been there for 10 years. He's a defensive tackle, and he'll be a senior. He was a captain last year and former all-SEC freshman. He's been consistent over his career, but can take over with many of the defensive linemen, especially some of the freshmen they brought in. They're jumping ship. He does have minor injury concerns, so that'll be something to watch, but getting the nod to finally go all in, Jackson will be a guy to pay attention to. LSU, Jaden Daniels is coming back, and so is Malik Neighbors with his arrest warrant dropped last week. Daniels will be a huge issue. I shouldn't have to say that. But will Sevyn Banks, this is another story, will Sevyn Banks, the former Ohio State transfer, be what he was as a Buckeye? Keeping the breakout players coming from the portal, we're going to keep that train going. Aaron Anderson is coming in from Alabama as a wide receiver. He'll be a redshirt freshman, did not play at Bama. He was a huge recruit out of high school. Super speed and your dynamic, ideal slot wide receiver. He's a perfect fill-in for Butte, who's out the door. In 2022, as I mentioned, he did not play for Bama, but he does possess legit 4.4 speed, and in high school he ran a 10.77 100-meter. And he's a guy from Edna Karr, and if you know anything about high schools in Louisiana that produce, Edna Karr is one of those schools. Omar Spates is the next guy. He's an inside linebacker. He'll be a senior from Oregon State, and he definitely would have been picked up in the NFL draft had he not come to Baton Rouge. He may not be considered a breakout player with 4 years of 60-plus tackles dominating the Pac-12, but he gets his first taste of the SEC. Last year he was all Pac-12 first team as he picked up 83 tackles and 8 TFLs, only 4 quarterback hurries. That's because he's dynamic as a coverage linebacker and a run stopper. And he's pretty much an automatic starter, in my opinion, at the middle linebacker position. The third guy, Savion Jones is a defensive end. He's a junior, backed up Ali Gay, and had solid snaps with his 6'6", 255-pound frame. He'll be a problem opposite of Harold Perkins, who will be coming off the edge a lot more, I would assume. Last year, Jones had 23 tackles, 6 TFLs, with 4.5 sacks, forced 1 fumble, and in 2 years he's played 25 games. So he has experience. We'll just see if he can take over as a primary starter. Mason Smith is a guy I could bring up, and it should be noted, with as much hype as he had last year before the injury, don't think that his talent has changed because he's still there, and he's going to start at defensive tackle, assuming he stays healthy. Shifting to Alabama, we're almost at the end of this. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe the most interesting spring under Nick Saban, I would ask. New coordinators. Tommy Rees is young and chopped liver with a quarterback battle on his hands. The portal was not kind. And, of course, tons of new for Nick Saban. The first breakout guy for Bama is Ty Simpson, the quarterback. He'll be a redshirt freshman. Now, Jalen Milroe showed flashes. He's a really solid quarterback, but I'm not on his hype train just yet. Ty Simpson just seems more polished, obviously, but he does lack the experience that Milroe currently holds. Last year, Simpson did play a little bit, went 4 or 5 passing for 35 yards, and he is a former 5-star recruit. Next guy is Jaheim Otis, defensive tackle. He'll be a sophomore and a big one, 6'5", 330 pounds, and Arkansas fans should remember him well, as he'll be the best returnee up the middle for Alabama. And he last year had 24 tackles, which, as I mentioned, Arkansas got a good dose of him. He had 8 tackles, the most on the season in the Arkansas game. He also attained 2 TFLs and a sack and a handful of quarterback hurries. The third one, Alabama has so many 5-star true freshmen, so how can I pick one? I'll just say one of the 5-star true freshmen is going to break out. 9 composite 5 stars, and that's impossible to pick one, so one of them surely will. A few of them to mention, obviously, Des Ricks as a corner, Caleb Downs, the number 1 safety, Justice Haynes, the number 2 running back, James Smith, the number 2 interior defensive lineman, Keon Keeley, the number 1 edge. The list goes on, but the 2 I have my eyes on, if I got to get specific, is Des Ricks, was listed as the number 1 corner for the 2024 class. He reclassified, and he only lost a little bit in the ratings. He's a stud, and he'll find his way onto the field, no problem. And then James Smith, the number 2 defensive lineman coming in. If you want to try and apply pressure to position on the defense outside of corner, it would be right up the middle. And obviously I mentioned Jaheim Otis. They just need a guy to play at that spot. I'd assume there'll be a battle this offseason. And James Smith might find himself into that second spot if he doesn't push Otis out of the way. Saban also got the number 1 and 2 junior college guys. So, I mean, I could even mention them, but that's a high-risk reward scenario for both me and Nick Saban. And now moving on to Arkansas, save the best for last. How could I not? We know the national stories by now, but insert a new offensive and defensive coordinator, but you keep KJ Jefferson and Rocket intact. The portal addressed wide receivers strongly, but can the D-line get dudes, and who emerges from the shadows as spring ball gets going? The first on my list of guys is running back Rashad Dubinion, who'll be a sophomore next year. Rocket will continue to be the feature back, as he proved can do that quite well. But Dubinion has the tools to take over the RB2 spot from A.J. Green. Last year, had 71 carries for 293 yards with 5 touchdowns, 12 catches for 108 yards, and in the bowl game, he picked up 112 games versus Kansas. Next guy on the list is Jordan Crook, linebacker, and he'll be a sophomore next year. Tons of mystery behind Pooh Paul. At linebacker, Antonio Grier obviously comes in, but is Crook better set and built for the SEC? That's a big question. Last year, Crook only picked up 12 tackles and had a half a TFL. He did start the bowl game and had 7 tackles, and we know all good and well that he is a headhunter. Thirdly, Quincy McAdoo, defensive back, former wide receiver, of course, and he'll be a sophomore next year. No need to introduce him. Can his surprise play continue, despite the fact that he lacks experience? You have McGlothern coming back, but the second cornerback spot is still up in the air, and it'll be McAdoo's to take if he wants it, and I'd assume that he does. Last year he had 4 starts at the defensive back position, corner, had 30 tackles with 1 TFL and 1 sack. He picked up 2 picks and had 6 pass breakups, and we know that he is super physical. Well, I actually went pretty far. I said that if I had time, I would bring up the best college football transfers currently on the market for Arkansas, but I'll let that marinate another week because the portal currently still closed. I don't know when it reopens off the top of my head, but if it does by next week, then maybe this list can improve because it's not a great market as it stands, but we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. If you made it this far, I'd like to thank you for sticking around and listening to me ramble over a bunch of things and sadness that this week has encumbered with Arkansas sports. Again, getting to the housekeeping things. You can find Hawgin the Mic on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and now on YouTube. So I kept my pinky promise that I gave y'all last week. And again, you can find me, Brady Michael, on Twitter at bmichael, Michael, replace the I with a 1, and on Instagram at Brady_Michael, with Michael the exact same way. That being said, there's going to be a lot to get to next week. SEC tournament is going to be going on for basketball. For the men, the women actually just beat Missouri not too long ago. So if there's some surprises there, we'll get into that. And then, of course, more baseball and softball, always going to be a topic to bring up. So thank you for listening. I'm Brady Michael, and I'm no longer hogging the mic. See you guys next time.